For a roguelike to stay interesting, it needs to have variance from run to run, but true randomness rarely produces a fun or interesting level. Each level still needs to be well designed, but recombined and remixed in a way that keeps it from getting stale. In Hades, one of their main techniques is to build each room out of smaller pieces that are recognizable but assembled into new shapes. Set pieces like pillars and traps are reused in semi-randomized locations in each room, and room layouts are flipped horizontally from time to time, giving the appearance of having more layouts than there really are, although I did have trouble catching that on camera. Early rooms are small, and later rooms are much larger, giving both a sense of progression and a lot more room for additional enemies. To maintain cohesiveness, you always enter a new room in the same direction that you left the old one, and you always enter from the bottom of the screen and leave from the top, giving a feeling of natural forward progression. Each room also has one or more discovery points placed around it, like urns that can be full of money, or with the right equipment a health reward, fishing points to gain resources that carry over from run to run, as well as resource troves that challenge the player to spend a little longer in a room to defeat an extra challenge in exchange for some kind of reward. There are also wells that allow the player to spend their resources or to acquire new abilities. Rooms can also be challenge rooms, requiring survival and having enemies that continually respawn until the time runs out, instead of being a fixed number. All of these add variance to otherwise randomly generated rooms. Both enemies and the player also need applicable tools to traverse the terrain. In Asphodel, each enemy that appears in the level has their own way to move over the magma that separates each piece of land, and the player, of course, can dash over it. Several of the enemies jump, some of them burrow underground and pop back up, some of them fly, some of them simply shoot projectiles and don't really move from where they are. Alternatively, the terrain needs to be designed in such a way that makes it easy to traverse. Other than in Astrovel, the terrain always matches up in a way that is easy for both monsters and the player to navigate it. This is critical because in a randomly generated level, you don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to be laid out, so you need to make sure that both the enemies and the player can always traverse it. Each level of Hades also has its own theme, which helps define a feeling of cohesiveness. Tartarus is walled-off rooms with intentionally laid traps. Asphodel is fiery and open with magma and craggly spouts instead of definite traps or walls. Elysium is more open and alive. Everything in Elysium regenerates over time, even the pillars and other terrain objects, giving it a completely different feel from the other levels. Styx is contrastingly small and cramped, with enemies and traps that are quick to defeat, but unforgiving. It also introduces several new mechanics rather late into the run, which makes it feel more dangerous than it really is. Overall, by making a relatively small number of components and room layouts for each floor, and then mixing them together not at complete random, but with thoughtfulness and care, it produces a game that has enough variety to feel like it's endless without being an endless amount of work.